Ladies and gentlemen, thank you all very much indeed for coming this evening. My name is Richard London. I'm Bodleian Librarian, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you to the Bodleian Libraries this evening for the second in a series of 6 lectures delivered by Garry Fabian Miller as part of his Honorary Fellowship at the Bodleian Library, which we're absolutely delighted and honoured to be hosting. Gary's series is entitled The Light Gatherers and follows the first lecture given in February this year. 4 more lectures will follow over the course of this year and next, and the third lecture, the next one in the series, will be held, ladies and gentlemen, I can exclusively reveal to you this evening, on the 19th of October. Please ink it into your diaries now. I don't have any more words to say this evening other than to say we all wait with eager anticipation for Gary's lecture. So please, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Garry, who will deliver his lecture, The Darkrooms, Erasure.
In this second lecture in the Light Gatherers series, The Darkrooms, Erasure, I will reflect on my life lived in the darkroom and the inevitable darkness that will fall on all chemical darkrooms. There will always hopefully be outliers that hold on, but they will be few, cuckoos in the nest in what photography has become, somewhat like my approach to these Oxford lectures. I will primarily focus on the spaces in which I have made my evolving work. They are, I believe, representative of the vast majority of darkrooms, broadly improvised domestic spaces. Darkrooms began in the sheds and outhouses of Victorian science, the homes of the curious, enthusiasts, freethinkers, people that wanted to understand the world through a new triangle of science, art and philosophy. One day we will understand that darkrooms like mine were one of the last pools of primal darkness in which a form of pure thought could be investigated and made visible. It is a place of truth and visions. The pulse of photography lived in the darkroom. It still flickers in those dark rooms that remain active and alive. My darkroom has closed. In the last weeks of November 2020, my last exposures were made. I had spent 50 years, half a century, in these darkened rooms. It was my life. It will have taken my life. An upstairs room between the P of players and P of police was my first darkroom, where I spent my summer holidays as a teenager developing prints. It is where I experienced the profound physical magic of photography for the first time. The building it is part of stands at the meeting of High Street and Wine Street in the middle of Bristol. The upper floors still belong to a photography and camera business. I now know this place as Cottle Corner, which I will talk more about later. I went into this darkroom in 1969. I was 12. Here I was tasked with developing and fixing exposed photographic paper. This was work in which I watched something miraculous appear, fugitive, then fixed pictures of people looking at the camera's eye and then at me. So this darkroom was a darkroom which my father ran with 2 other men as a photography business, and this is a picture of my mother and my aunt from that time. I left this darkroom and made my first pictures inevitably with a camera and also of people. These few pictures were taken in the Shetland Islands when I was 16, after I'd done my A-levels. I decided I had to leave Bristol and go to Shetland because that's where I would make what was thought of as photography in the early 1970s. So I went and spent summer living in Shetland. In the early 1970s, most photographic practice was in the humanist documentary tradition. Most teaching and training supported that monochrome social purpose. I followed in this tradition, but when working for the housing charity Shelter in Bristol and Somerset in 1973, I decided to work with colour transparency film. Somehow I knew that the future, my future for sure, of photography could only be in colour. The revolution had started. So I'm about 16 or 17 and I'm making these photographs, and at this point I've never seen any American colour photography. It hasn't been shown in England, in a place where I would go. So this predates all of that work, and it wasn't until probably 1974, 1975 that I would have seen perhaps the work of William Eggleston at Arnolfini Gallery in Bristol. To be a teenager in Bristol at this period allowed me to understand that there was a bigger world with a different value system. The city's Arnolfini Gallery and its bookshop helped lead me into this new world of feminist activism in the writings of Marina Warner, who's here tonight, and Susan George, amongst others. European artists such as Geir Deckers and Jan Divitz, who used photography to remake attitudes to the land, had a big influence on me. They also worked in colour. They believed the world was colour. These and others gave me the confidence to cast off the orthodoxy of what photography had become and what it could be. Around that time, I met the photographer Paul Graham, who was studying microbiology at Bristol University. We were both self-taught amateurs in the way photography defined people such as us. The majority of pictures made across the history of photography and then printed in the darkroom have been made by amateurs. Photography has always been a democratic medium available to the many. This is one of photography's great gifts. Paul and I were outsiders. We were interested in different subject matter, but we shared a commitment to colour photography and had both chosen to use transparency film and to print onto Cedar Crown paper. It was an unconventional choice at the time. We made our first experiments in Paul's bedsit in an improvised darkroom with only makeshift equipment. Some of this early work, Paul's architectural interiors of cafes and chip shops. This is a lost Paul Graham, which I bought from him in 1975. I imagine this hasn't been seen outside of my studio in 45 years. I'm sure Paul's not seen it in that time. I was making abstract colour fields of green pond surfaces and seascapes. These were shown in our first exhibitions at the Arnolfini in 1979. In this second lecture, I felt it important to share how I entered the world of the darkroom and what stage photography had reached in its evolution in the late 1960s and early 1970s. The 50 years that have since unfolded have opened the medium and the spaces it can occupy in unimagined ways. This has been my world, and it is finally passing. photography's evolution from a chemical-based relationship of light in the darkness of the darkroom has been transformed and now overwhelmed by a camera-based practice of digital capture and output. After 200 years, there were many reasons that chemical-based photography could not and should not continue. This was inevitable. However, the swiftness of the end has been brutal. Its culture and sites of making existed everywhere. Darkrooms were part of the settlements and communities across this country and the wider world. They were part of the fabric of villages and towns, education, schools and colleges, and most importantly, people's domestic lives. As I have said, the first darkrooms were improvised spaces in outbuildings and sheds, moving into houses, sometimes in a permanent space, but more often in garages, under stairs, sharing bedrooms, kitchens and bathrooms. This was my darkroom life and that of most people. They were small, cramped, make-do and mend places, precarious spaces in which everyone could have access to a transformative experience in which we made images appear, seen by us for the first time. A direct relationship with light and darkness. Together in the darkroom, the materials enabled us to bring something other into the world, fragile, a source of energy that shared its existence with the maker, a place where the human became part of bringing a latent primary agency into the world. In the past, this would have been the realm, the site of the shaman, the seer, but it was available to all of us. It was everyday magic. Cultures have built religions on less. Some of us in this room knew this place and still carry its memory and wonder. At the end of these lectures, I would like to make space and time to share these stories together, considering how this fellowship could create a depository for the lives that experience this world, whilst also creating physical spaces and practical sharing communities that can maintain some vestige of this world, both as a place of stories and memories, but also somewhere people can come to explore a future safe chemical darkroom practice in which they connect with the lodestone, the alchemical cave in which we might all still become like others. That's kind of probably the most, we're going to do lots of things while I'm doing these lectures in Oxford, but somewhere in the world there has to be a kind of safe home for these lives that were lived in these places. And within 10 years, most people will be dead who occupy these spaces, whether they're people whose work you know, or just all the people that worked in these places, who were postmen and worked in factories, people called amateur photographers, and they've all got remarkable things to say about something very primitive which they had access to, and it would be great to think we could find a way to create a home for this while there's still a chance to do it. I began in Cottle Corner in its darkroom, then a brief time with Paul Graham in a Clifton bedroom. These were all before I had my first darkroom. This was in North Somerset, a darkened utility room, 8 foot square, with my first enlarger, the Durst M601. This has been present in all my darkrooms until my last darkroom. It sits in there now, silent, dark. From this first darkroom, I would walk 10 steps to a balcony from which I made my first work as an artist, sections of England's sea horizons in 1976-77. This was an example was the one I showed earlier, that horizon photo that was taken from this large body of work made over 2 years. And that pattern of working has been the one I followed for the rest of my life. A home containing the darkroom, all the pictures being made within a walking distance of the home and the darkroom, a kind of domestic life in which all of this is woven together. in a meaningful way. Next year, February until October, the National Museum of Wales are going to show the entire Sea Horizon series for the first time. So that's the first time that have ever been seen in the whole series for 45 years. So that's going to be something to look forward to. I then moved to Lincolnshire, and I was trying to find a way of life based around the darkroom and home, and I needed to extricate myself from Bristol and from the Bristol scene, which was really dominated by an approach to photography I really wasn't part of, and so I had to leave it to make it and find a different way. So I went to Lincolnshire, and there I began again, established a darkroom. This time it was in another utility room. I had fridges and freezers around me. It was next to the kitchen. And then beyond this, there was a field and a pond and a garden. And here in the winter of 1984-5, the great transformative moment occurred when the camera was removed and I made pictures directly with a beam of light in the dark. And that's probably taken me all the time since the Sea Horizon, so nearly a decade to know that the camera had to be abandoned because it was an obstacle. And I was trying to imagine or conceive of a way photography could exist independently of that, and so it took me a long time. And then this period, this moment occurred, and it all fell into place. One day in my garden, observing the simple beauty of the life cycle of the trees and the plants that I was cultivating, it occurred to me that translucent plant tissue might be treated in the same way as a colour film transparency, forming an airborne projected image inside the enlarger head from which I could make a Cibachrome print. I could gather a leaf, here this was a cow parsley which I'm watching unfold over a number of days. And so kind of contained in this dome was this cow parsley, and then eventually it reached a point where it split and it threw itself up and became this small tree, and then continued to grow to become a 6-foot cow parsley. So I gathered this object and take it to the darkroom, or it may have been a flower or a seed head, and I placed it in the head of the enlarger and allowed it to make an image of itself by passing through light through it. It was akin to Fox Talbot's original pencil of nature experiments, but it was made uniquely possible by the positive to positive Cibachrome process. So this is really, life is made up of these things in a really profound way. So for a reason which I didn't understand, and Paul Graham felt the same, we both understood that Cibachrome was this incredibly pure in a sense of its colour, not pure as meaning pure and safe, but pure, beautiful, and there was no resolved colour material to print on but Cibachrome in the early 70s, and so we had to shoot on transparency film because it's a positive print process, not negative positive. And if that hadn't occurred, that decision, probably all that I'm talking about would never have happened. But then it all evolved from that point. And evolution, Darwin's theory of evolution is the most profound, kind of life force. And so, my whole life is a manifestation of that. And so this kind of commitment to a material then shaped everything that happened for the next 50 years. And I became a total expert on this one material, all of the potential contained within it, and I committed my life to it. I didn't use a camera after that. I was free to originate my own visual language. I could walk unhindered, let the light into me as if my own skin and brain were silvered. I could not create light, I only needed to expose myself to it by putting myself in its path. The first exposures I made during the winter of 1984-5 were of single leaves. From the start, the prints felt like resolved objects because of their inherent beauty and how they were made. I had discovered a unity of purpose. The plant material was part of the fabric of my daily life. When walking or gardening inside the darkroom, the beam of light imprinted the image of the moment. It felt like a simple domestic act, but implicit in it was my profound wonderment. This is a text from a book Alice Oswald and I are doing at the moment. So this is just extracted from a long poem she's writing for this event. The previous picture was poplar leaves, and those poplar leaves and this poem get joined together in this publication, which will come out in July. So that's kind of Alice reflecting on this moment when I abandoned the camera. In 1998, I then moved to Devon. For a year, I worked between a small bedroom, 6 foot by 10 feet, developing the prints in the adjacent bathroom. And I would say that was what photography was for everybody then, unless you, for some reason, doing it as a profession. I could work on large pieces in the true spirit of make, do and mend, walking the River Bovey to the Beechwood to make these seasonal sequential pieces. So this is a piece made over 10 days of going back to this wood and gathering basically a whole year's worth of beech trees' life, all existing in that moment of time, and then taking it back to this little house in this bedroom and printing these pictures in real time. In the morning, I would stand with the tree, examining its new greenness, then gather a ribbon of leaves and take them to the darkroom for printing. I would follow the same routine the next morning and so on for 30 days, until the tree had reached its full chlorophyll-rich greenness. Together, the tree and I had breathed the same air and marked the life cycle we were sharing, a frame at a time. To accommodate these daily observances, I had to remodel my life. I had to wait a whole year before I could make an equivalent spring photosynthesis piece. It took me 6 years to understand the colour cycle and to work out how the time-lapse pictures could be assembled and how they could be printed. So it took all those years to understand the method, and then I had to wait seasons to pass before I could then make these pictures again and become a better maker of these pictures. For 6 years, the symbiosis between photography and photosynthesis felt like one of the most perfectly resolved working methods imaginable. But during the same period, I came to realise that I wanted a still more direct, less mediated relationship with light. Then I at last arrived on Dartmoor in 1989, but still continue in another utility room. Here I begin all over again, using a different intermediary agent between the light and the paper. I began to leave the negative, the transparency carrier empty, and I let just the pure white light shine through the empty square and illuminate what felt to me like a new world. Exactly the place from which Mahodiinaj had imagined colour photography would one day be released, and the experience of space and time could be transmitted through the action of light alone. In place of plant tissue, I began to use glass vessels as my light filters. I filled them with water or oil, sometimes wine, and put them directly onto Chrome paper. Singly or stacked. Probably something to understand is when I'm making these kinds of pictures, I'm building these towers of vessels containing diffusing and refracting materials, and then the middle one has a volume of liquid. So in that central one, for example, there's probably, I'm guessing this, but there's probably 4.5 pints of oil. And so I have to set everything, I have to decide how I make this picture, and then in total darkness I have to build this and correctly align and everything. And then, so this is obviously a photograph being framed and mocked up to give a sense of this process. And then eventually you set the beam of light off, and it shines into the darkness. And at the end of that process, you then have to, the light goes off, and you have to then disassemble everything and return everything to where it came. And it's super intense, because everything could go wrong. Yeah, so it's a very, yes, it's like a whole range of artistic practice. It's very intensely focused on something on the edge of chaos, which you're an agent within. So the light shines downwards through the vessels, and it makes photograms. So these are the kinds of images that would then appear. So this is kind of intuitive investigation, with some kind of, perhaps some scientific knowledge, but basically none, really. And it is just a kind of visceral exploration and then accumulation of knowledge. The following year, I changed the setup and made the images by shining light horizontally through the vessels and across the darkroom space. This moment when I finally began to occupy space was a key moment. So then we've left the confines of what photography had been really, I guess, and what photograms were, which were all about space and light being allowed here and there, and now it's much more light occupying a room and intervening in the room to bring it onto the paper surface, which is now over there on the wall. It was this period when the real journey of my life began. Ever since the Erasure lamp has been truly my guiding light, I owe everything I've discovered to the slowly improving awareness that has evolved out of my relationship with the light beam that the lamp releases. Together the two of us were trying to make a pure form of photography. Finally, in 1997, after 20 years, I was able to design and build a darkroom, this time apart from our home. A walk through a garden, across a field, away from domestic life, but still a domestic, intimate space with the spirit of the shed and intuitive investigation. So I just thought I would show a few interiors of my darkroom, which is, I think, really representative of what happens in darkrooms. So these are 4 images taken by Historic England of the darkroom. This was the first darkroom they came to document. I don't think they've probably done more than 2, and they should do more. And anyway, so this is what the inside of my darkroom looks like, and it just becomes an accretion of all the years of making. And then it becomes like it is now. It's like it's an artwork, I suppose, and it sits there now, inactive. So these are just the things we accumulate: notes about exposures, tests for exposures, things once seen, and matter to me. Next slide. Some of the vessels that one uses, kind of objects used to hold in block light at different places, lots of tape used to hold things in place during exposures, kind of lighter fuel tins I don't know if you can still get those things. And so that's, I use a lot of glass, which I fix materials to, and they all have to be cleaned all the time to get all the adhesives and such like off. So used to get through loads of those. Next slide. So this is the Enlarger, the one I've had all forever, and this is Evolution. So this is what photography publishing was. If you were a teenager in the early 1970s, all you could buy was the Time Life Library of Photography. So those are the books I would have bought all those years ago. And now this is the purpose they serve, to build this movable stack to work from, to position objects on, and so one could talk about a lot of these things, but particularly I particularly like this, because this is exactly as it looks if you walked in today, because I remember when Philippe Garner, who came to the first lecture, who kind of basically built the photography market in the auction houses, when he came to see it, to write about it, he was so excited by this, because basically this was where photography was when he began, and then from nowhere he built photography out, market photography out from this into the thing we know now. So this is like real enthusiasts kind of history of photography. So that's going to be looked after in the future, that stack. Right, next slide. Okay, just go back to the previous slide. Can we do that? Yeah, and this is also to people like me when we know it's all over. So here are the glass vessels that over here from different colours you see. They get filled with water. But this drum here, this thing here, is a black repaired plastic, and the thing it sits on, that black machine, that's like bought in a photography shop, in probably 1978, and that was used for all of the pictures, for 45 years, and it's all broken and falling apart, and none of it can be repaired. Yeah, I mean, and these darkrooms that I went to in the latter years, when I was scavenging for materials, because materials were gone, were just full of stuff like this, and basically what would happen is somebody would die, and their descendants would have this, and then they'd just call some people, and men would come with skips and just pick all this up and throw it in the skips. That happened in so many places I went to, I hardly went anywhere. And that's happened all over the world. And then this is the wall onto which all the exposures get thrown. And then the stuff we've seen in different photographs are like the history of my kids' lives, in school, the artwork they bring home and give me, and I take down and pin it up. Yeah, that's quite interesting. There's a Samuel Palmer up there, and William Blake over there. And then I'm doing a show next year at Arnfenium. We're having Samuel Palmer and William Blake in it, so that's really special. Because they've been there with me on all those exposures. So we're going to have some wonderful Samuel Palmers and hopefully two really great William Blakes. All my darkrooms have been completely dark. No light can exist beyond that exposed in the paper. No red light, no safe light. No, it's completely darkness. You have to work with Cedar. For most of my life, since the mid-1980s, all my mornings have been spent in this black box, alone, apart, away from the world, contained within the darkroom's enclosure. It is both an intimate physical relationship shaped by familiarity, intuition and touch as I navigate the space and the objects contained to make images appear. So this is a text that Alice Oswald, about 6 or 7 years ago when we started working together on collaborative work. So this was a text for a film which I made. This is how the film began, but this is a fairly good response to Alice's experience of time in the darkroom. To make pictures in such a place becomes a collaborative action and event. The light is brought into the darkness by a series of often choreographed movements, a performance in the space, the sequence of actions and interventions with the light, shaping and modulating its agency within the darkness, handling and manipulating the materials to record and leave traces of these actions upon the picture's surface. There is always an intensity of focus and desire to reach a fluidity of movement and thought in the creation of an exposure. The aspiration is to reach a state where the images appear as simply as a breath. The struggle, the labour and the physical passing of time becoming absent. A state of deep breathing. As the years pass, the duration, the time contained within the exposure has increased. In the last decade, they often extended across hours, sometimes a day and a night. So this was just how it evolved. But I feel this is really important to me because somehow it was like breaking every rule that could exist in photography, and in exposure is just like it's a day and a night. And that's how long it takes, and photography was always about a moment, and so the way it evolved in this way was really important, and I think it is really important in what it raises as questions. The exposures became a form of excavation, the releasing of the colour embedded in the dyes. The darkroom on occasion now feels an archaeological site in the final phase of excavation, a few artefacts being uncovered before the open ground is backfilled and a total darkness returns. As the time has passed, accumulated on the paper's surface, embedded in its substance, a form of anarchy now seems to exist. I am both active and at times absent as the picture generates itself through my actions, yet continues in my absence. It becomes an organism, creating wonder and beauty while also existing outside of and questioning ideas of labour, work and time. This aspect of creation in the darkroom as existing beyond established patterns and rules, non-conformist, became increasingly important. This is a picture from 1999 called Blake's Room, and I should have pointed out, in the darkroom earlier we had a picture, I think it's called The Poet by Blake, which is a man sitting at a desk with a light above him, and it's a cube-like space, and that sat in the dark for many years. And then this picture kind of was made in 1999, and I see this is a kind of thing to do with what that picture was about. And I've kind of imbued it, I guess, over a period of time I've lived with the picture. With hindsight, I wonder if this is what led me into a parallel world, part of, but outside of most known experience and working practice. The morning passed. I would leave the darkroom and re-enter the studio to view the images that had been made. The studio is the darkroom's equivalent. Its lightness mirrors the darkroom's darkness. Between these two places, the pictures have to reach a point of balance and resolution. One summer visitor to my studio described it as the lightest room in southwest England. True enough, on days like this, it radiates and dazzles, and for a reason. Before they go into the world, I want my pictures to flourish in this luminous environment and find purpose and meaning here. In the darkroom, their presence is imagined and felt for, but they are undisclosed. They are like spirits, waiting to be seen. I have now left my last darkroom. Endings can take many forms. As you can see, this is one of the final boxes of Chrome paper, and it's now become ancient. Yet, from this almost dead, extinct material, magic still pulsed, seen in these late pictures. Inside the darkroom during the end days, I felt more and more that I was inhabiting an ancient decorated cave where the trace of every exposure I had made was inscribed in the walls. Just a few useful remnants are left of papers and chemistry. Expiry dates are long past. Their condition was fragile, but still they had a faint chemical pulse and the potential to make a molten, latent image visible. The image seems to be in flux, slipping in meltdown. It is as if gravity is pulling the golden yellow light down until it merges into the pool of floating grey. Not long ago, I would have considered this puddling of colour evidence only of chemical contamination, but not now. I had to spend a lot of time with these pictures, looking and believing that these were pictures that had to exist in this state because they didn't exist in any acceptably correct state. But I knew just kind of in my gut that these were pictures. This is the pictures which had to exist, and some other force was active. Not long ago, I would have considered this chemical contamination. Not now. I view these pictures now that I began to believe and understand them as a form of natural magic on the main line, beyond chance, that connected to John Herschel and Henry Fox Talbot and Mahaly Nage. In this dying of the light in the darkroom, a vestige of what chemical photography could uniquely bring into the world was still flickering. The pulse was barely there, but it was still there, and this was just such a wonderful time getting to understand these pictures. Increasingly, I think back to Cottle Corner, the curved building we saw earlier in the lecture. 2 centuries ago, between 1791 and 1798, the same building and the same upstairs room where the darkroom was were at the centre of Bristol's literary and political life. In those years, they were the home and business address of the bookseller, printer and poet Joseph Cottle, who has some claim to have been one of the animators, if not, as he himself imagined, the founder of the English Romantic movement. His bookshop was, for the New Romantics, something like what City Lights in San Francisco was for the 1950s Beat generation, a meeting place for the hard-up young poets and political radicals who converged in Bristol during this revolutionary era. Cottle was a great service, providing food and shelter, advances on their works in progress, and enthusiastic support. During 1797 and 1798, Samuel Taylor Coleridge and William and Dorothy Wordsworth were living on the edge of the Quantocks in North Somerset, creating the new poetry that they believed had the power to reshape the world. Joseph Cottle was their patron and the first printer of what would become the lyrical ballads. They would meet and stay at Cottle's in Bristol, in that corner building, revising poems, in Coleridge's case lecturing on the revolution, and staying over in this building. Now, I only discovered these associations quite recently, in Adam Nicholson's wonderful book about the year in the Quantocks when these poems were being written. And he kind of lived that year for a year, and went back with all the material and pretended to be them, I suppose. A bit like he's now pretending to be a bird and dressing up in I don't know if you've seen these pictures, but he's now decided to inhabit the bird by becoming a bush with all this gear that birders watch, and then he goes out and lies down so he can take photographs of birds and try to imagine what it is to be a bird. This is his new project, so it's very much like this project, so I'm very excited by this new project. He's mad, but anyway, but he's great. Right. So having discovered this, a lot of this last period, 2 or 3 years, and I've just not really had the time to think about this, but I'm left with this kind of daydream that my first experience of the darkroom tapped into the residue of English Romanticism that was imprinted in its walls, and I became its unlikely carrier. Perhaps all the exposures I've made since those teenage days have been a slow and gradual evocation and outpouring of this stuff which I kind of somehow absorbed, which I kind of believe. The darkroom is a place of time. The exposures acted in the moment, but was equally the accumulation of all the exposures made, the time accumulating and held in the space. I believe the darkroom created a kind of time machine, a parallel place which you enter in the moment, but which can then carry you back in time and project you forward in time. In its darkness, light is channeled by the maker to create and inhabit some in-between place and state. It is a site of magic and alchemy. This spirit helps you believe in the possibility of something other inhabiting the world, which on occasions you encounter and can be guided by. Organised religions aspire to practices which try to channel this. In my life, living apart as a free spirit, inhabiting primitive, intuitive space, the darkroom has often brought me close to this place. Walking my Dartmoor circle of woods and the high ridge paths is like a kind of crucible, and in here all the possibilities exist, which I then experience and carry, and back into my darkroom, and out of that the pictures kind of come, and that's basically been my life, I suppose, that model. An openness of exposure to the chance encounters of living, I've often found, brings forward what will happen next and how you may be led into the future. I ended the first lecture with this image, one of the last I made in the darkroom. It contained all the joy and hope I had found in this place. Later that evening, so this is the night of the first lecture, I went back to my hotel room and I heard the voice of Kathleen Frances. I've never heard of Kathleen Frances, and I heard a voice, after midnight on Radio 3, singing her song Boy. And it felt to belong with this late darkroom picture, from which this exposure has since begun to mutate and metamorphise into something else. In the first lecture I included a short film which was made with Anne Muller, the cellist, and I want to this is something I feel I'm going to continue doing with these Oxford lectures. So this is a new film I'm going to show you to finish, which has grown out of the last lecture and this encounter with Kathleen's voice. So now Kathleen and I are establishing a relationship and talking about how we might make things together. But this is how I've lived my life, in this way, an evolving cycle of discovery, always in flux and never ending. And hopefully photography will continue to live in a similar state. And that's what we're trying to understand, what that is and how we can contribute to it. So we're going to watch the film now.
I am not the same as before, and he knows it. Letting go is hard. He loved me, but I couldn't see when he was holding back from me. I couldn't believe, and he knows it. He knows it. And I fingertips when he holds me. But it's too late, he can't reach me. I am not the same as before, and he knows letting go is hard. And he wants to see me. He knows he's done me wrong. I know forgiveness is right, so I'm willing to give it a try. Give it a try. And I can feel regret forming on his fingertips when he holds me. But it's too late, he can't reach me. I am not the same as before, and he knows letting go is hard. And I've made bad choices. I'm hoping this ain't one. Well, you had your chance, now the time's gone to answer for it. Answer for it. And I can see his face longing for that better place when he held me. And I felt weak, but we are not in the same place anymore. Letting go is hard. Letting go is hard. He knows I know it.
Okay, thank